The author of the controversial book and producer of the provocative Hindi movie, Aphrodite Khan, who also known as Christina Lewinsky, opted to avoid the limelight, opting to spend her time with her loving family. She put the little Indian slum girl to rest, her heart at peace. After all, she had done all she could, and had come about as close to closure as one could have expected. Her life after the book and the movie was simply a meandering, wonderful time with a loving husband and lovely daughters, Ifat and Aphrodite. One day, quite unexpectedly, a door that had taken a lifetime to close burst wide open, flooding her life with an unpleasant malodorous wind of an abused childhood. The last person that she had expected to think of her, all the way from India, had brought the fetid wind with him. She felt it, like a mighty hurricane whose purpose was to uproot, destroy, and wreck everything she had built. It felt like dead relative had been resurrected and was asking for his due. It was her biological mother, Begum Rehanaji Sheikh Uldeen Khan. The same woman who abandoned her in the deserts of Saudi Arabia and publicly denied and disowned her in an Indian court was now at her threshold, begging for forgiveness. Up to that point, Christina would have forgiven anyone that had wronged her, with one exception, her biological mother. If the old Saudi had been resurrected from hell and placed at her doorstep, she would have accepted his apology. She had endlessly tried to make excuses for her mother's rejection of her that day, but found herself mute. Her mother tried to explain why she could not admit in court that Christina was her Ifat. Her Muslim terrorist husband, Sheikh Uldeen Khan, had threatened to kill her daughter Ifat, slaughter her 3 sons, and also murder her if she testified that the apostate Muslim girl who became an infidel Christian was none other than her own daughter. To ensure compliance, he had 3 of his Muslim terrorists accompany her in court. As she got to her feet to testify in the witness box, they shifted in their seats and stared at her, drumming the warning home. It was obvious that the thugs were carrying loaded pistols concealed in their Islamic pajamas. Courts in India, for the longest time, have required full-body checks and security scanning. Almost like airports. In spite of that, through bribery and threats, the 3 Muslim terrorists have clandestinely smuggled in their guns. So, Rehana had no choice but to comply and ensure Ifat's safety. Rehana gently reminded her daughter of her sacrifice when she came to know that her own daughter had fallen in love with her own husband and deprived her of her life's love. She told her that for her sake she divorced her husband, Jamal Khan, sacrificed her love, forsook her comfortable life in America, returned to India, and married the most evil man she had ever known in her life. That evil mullah treated her as his sex slave and imprisoned her in his house at Mumbai for many years until death had released her from his tyranny. Shortly after smuggling his stepson into Lahore for a terrorist mission, Imam Sheikh Uldeen Khan was killed in a police encounter by the anti-terrorist police of Mumbai. The police encounter is an Indian euphemism for a situation in which a gangster or a terrorist is cornered, and when asked to surrender, chose not to surrender peacefully and was shot dead. It was not his first encounter with the law enforcement of Mumbai. The Imam had been arrested a few times before along with his radical associates. Each time, they were ordered by the courts to be set free for lack of evidence. As such, the anti-terrorist team decided to deal with the terrorist Imam in their own special way. While Sheikh Uldeen Khan was going to conduct his 4 o'clock morning prayer at his mosque, the anti-terrorist police dispatched him with a headshot from the rear and planted a loaded gun by his side. When the people of Mumbai woke up that morning, they read in the local newspapers that their righteous Imam was killed in a police encounter. His congregation buried him on the same day and considered him a Muslim shaheed, martyr. Many would swear, that day, by their Allah and Holy Quran that they would, sooner or later, avenge the blood of their great Imam and Mullah. After that, Rehana began relate how she had come to know of her daughter's recent problems and her whereabouts. One fateful day, an Indian TV documentary aired The Child Bride and the Old Man of Arabia in English. It did not take Rehana long to recognize her daughter. She then went to the market and obtained a copy of the controversial movie. She watched it in horror, with her tears falling like molten wax. Before watching the movie, she had thought that her daughter suffered a lot under the cruelty of the old Arab man. She had no idea of the amount of abuse her daughter had endured as a wife to the Arab. It pained her that her daughter had to walk that part of her life all alone and held herself responsible for all the evil that had descended upon her daughter. She decided to find her no matter what the cost might be, knowing her daughter to be in America. Through the documentary she came to know that her daughter had married an American and adopted his name. When Rayhana shared her findings with her two sons, they reacted negatively. Her firstborn son Irfan Khan disappeared one day and she had never heard anything about him after that. Even his stepfather claimed ignorance. The other two sons flatly stated that they had no intention of associating with a sister who had forsaken Islam and embraced the corrupted religion of the infidels, Christianity. More damning, they considered her book an unbearable shame and a stigma against the Muslims. Despite Rayhana's pleading for help, they were unwavering in their resolve and turned away, offering none. Accepting that her sons would not lift a finger to help her in her quest, Rayhana decided to go back to America alone and start her search for her daughter. Her sons had left her with the choice of choosing between them or their sister. They openly told her that if she returned to America for the sake of that accursed murtada, kafara, and nijasakuda, accursed apostate, infidel, and unclean dog, they would never accept her again as their mother. Rayhana Khan chose to forsake her two sons. She had now lost everything but her quest. She was once again back to square one. She lost her first son, Irfan Khan, whom she conceived when she was raped in the Sahara Desert by the two Saudi policemen. She lost her third husband, Sheikh Uldin Khan, to a police encounter. Her two sons, Rafiq Khan and Abdul Rab Khan, from her second marriage had effectively disowned her. Their father, her second husband, Jamal Khan, cheated on her and fell in love with her daughter, Ifat Khan. Rayhana had already lost 5 sons, Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman, Ali and Muhammad who born to her, along with her only daughter, Ifat from her first marriage. When she travelled to Saudi Arabia and left them with her mother in India, all 5 ran away from home, becoming perpetual fugitives and vagabonds in the streets of Mumbai. To her firstborn and only daughter, Ifat Khan, Rayhana decided to put things right, seeking forgiveness and reconciliation. Upon her return to America, she had no address, phone number, or any means of locating her daughter. The only clue she had was her daughter's new name, Christina Lewinsky. She tried to find her through the FBI, but they politely declined to disclose any information. She was told that since the assassination of the Indian-American movie director, Rita Smith, the author of the provocative book, The Child Bride and the Old Man of Arabia, FBI would not to divulge personal information unless the request was endorsed by law. Out of curiosity, one may ask how the wife of a terrorist imam could get a visa to the US and the Indian cops okayed her flight out. No wonder, some close members of the family of the mastermind behind September 11 attacks, Osama bin Laden, flew freely from country to country in Europe until they died in a UK plane crash in July 31, 2015. Among the dead is his sister, Sana bin Laden and her husband, Zuhair Hashim. After that Rayhana decided to search the old-fashioned way. She tracked the first and last name of her daughter. She started with American women who answered to the same name, contacting them to verify their identity. What made her task a monumental one was the fact that she could not narrow it down to any particular state or city. She could have spent years calling without making any headway. For all she knew, she could die of old age even before going through half of the 50 states. The die cast, Rayhana Khan set to the task. Whether one should call it miracle or rare luck, her search did not last more than a few months before she was able to find her daughter. After spending short time phoning the Christina Lewinskys in her state, Rayhana found her daughter. When her daughter responded, she recognized her accent and reverted to Urdu. Rayhana did not reveal her reason for calling, who she was or why she had phoned. She just pretended that she had dialed by mistake. A few days later, Rehana Khan flew in and knocked on her door. Opening her door, her daughter saw her standing in front of her house and recognized her immediately. Christina felt as if the doors of hell had been pried open again, and with it, a bitter aftertaste of her past rose up like bile. Christina's first reflex was to tell her mother to go away or be escorted by the police. Her resolve crumbled when her mother fell at her feet and began to cry loudly and beg for forgiveness. Christina's husband and 2 daughters came running to the door. At first, Christina did not react to the Indian woman sobbing and crying at her feet. Christina had already told her 2 daughters that their Muslim grandmother had died before they were born. When her Hindu mother came back to her life, Christina made her children to believe that Rani Krishna was the only true grandmother to them because she was the one who saved her life and adopted her as her own daughter. But Rani Krishna had already married a white guy, who became a Hindu like her, and both husband and wife adopted 2 female orphans from a Hindu ashram in Pune, India. No surprise that Christina's 2 daughters were at a total loss. Astonished to see an Indian woman supplicating at their mother's feet, bitterly crying and pleading in a language they did not understand. Her husband was intuitive enough to figure something was amiss. When pressed, Christina admitted her relationship to their uninvited guest. Coincidentally, Mustafa Abdul Gawad, who sorely lacked leads to his target, used the same trial and error method to pinpoint Christina Lewinsky's location. Media reports indicated that Ifat Khan and Christina Lewinsky were one and the same. He spent time in college, blending in and establishing himself before embarking on the next phase of his mission. He had ascertained that his target lived in a small town just a few hours away. His next move was to purchase a firearm, a black market pistol, since he could never qualify for a pistol permit or a concealed weapons permit. A rifle or shotgun would be far too obtrusive and unwieldy. Once he had confirmed her home address, he made his way to the Lewinsky residence. It was on a Saturday morning when he arrived at the quiet little town. His long beard and Pakistani clothes stood out among the residents of the peaceful town, and made many uneasy. Arriving at the residence of his target, Mustafa was startled to see his own mother living under the roof of the very girl he had come to kill. Scanning the house from a safe distance, he sighted the family members at the front door with his hunting binoculars from across the street. The confines of his car did nothing to ease the creeping frantic feelings arising from the mixed feelings he was now confronted with. Mustafa vaguely remembered a Christian girl visiting his house many years ago claiming to be the daughter of his mother, Begum Rehanaji Sheikh Uldin Khan. At that time, he had brushed it off, considering the intrusion trivial. He was told by his mother that she had not married a man before his pseudo-Saudi father. His mother had vehement denial sealed the matter for him. It must have been a matter of mistaken identity, and the court ruling closed the issue. It now dawned upon him that the apostate with his mother was exactly who she had claimed to be. He had come all this way only to kill his own sister. As he grappled with his realization, his mother and the Lewinskys got into their van. Like any faithful Muslim true to his Allah and Prophet, despite his personal misgivings, there was no doubt Mustafa Abdul Gawad was prepared to kill his parents if they happened to come between him and his God-sent mission. It is very imperative before we resume our narrative to explain why Mustafa was ready and willing to kill even his parents and siblings for the sake of his religion. Islam requires the true Muslim to completely commit to it and its cause. Islam calls this doctrine the al-wala wal-bara. This is very important doctrine in Islam and needs to be fully explained before we proceed. Simply put, it means to love for the sake of Allah and to hate for the sake of Allah. Wherefore, al-wala wal-bara is love and hate for Allah's sake. But, what does this love and hate exactly mean? Loving for the sake of Allah means to love Allah and to show loyalty to Him by following His Sharia law. It means to love all that is good and permissible in the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad, sayings and deeds of the Prophet of Islam, his hadiths and biography. The Quran and the Sunnah are the main sources of the Sharia. This type of love requires one to defend Allah's deen, Islamic religion's way of life, preserve it, and spread it. It is to love those who are obedient to Allah and to defend and assist them. These are the party of Allah, Muslims. Enmity for the sake of Allah signifies showing anger and hatred toward those who oppose Allah, His Messenger Muhammad, His deen, Islamic religion, and the Muslim believers. Those who oppose Allah are the party of Satan, all non-Muslims such as Jews, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, Confucians, Sikhs, Yazidis, Baha'is, Zoroastrians, Sabians, animists, voodooists, atheists, apostates, communists, Satanists, etc. Also Muslim hypocrites or disloyal Muslims come under this category. In addition, Muslim Shiites are placed by the Muslim Sunnis in the list of the above-mentioned non-Muslims and treated as infidels who deserve to be hated and killed and vice versa. It is also to struggle and fight against them in order to uphold and spread the way of Allah and His Messenger. Al-Wala wal-Bara requires one to ally oneself with Allah, His final Prophet Muhammad, and Muslims wherever they are found against the Kofar, infidels, even if it is against their own relatives, parents, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, grandparents, uncles, aunties, cousins, in-laws, etc. Sheikh Muhammad Said al-Qadani, in his book, Al-Wala wal-Bara, writes, Islam of a man can never be accepted, even if he abandons polytheism, unless he shows enmity towards the disbelievers and polytheists, as Allah says in Surat Al-Mujadilah 58, verse 22. You will not find any people who believe in Allah and the Last Day, making friendship with those who oppose Allah and His Messenger, even though they are their fathers, or their sons, or their brothers, or their kindred, people. Surah Al-Mujadilah 58, 22. It is a matter of belief and disbelief, as Allah says, O you who believe! Do not take your fathers or your brothers as protectors if they prefer disbelief to faith. Whoever among you takes them for protectors will only be wrongdoers. Say, if your fathers, your sons, your brothers, your wives, your kinsmen, the wealth which you have acquired, the commerce in which you fear a decline, or the houses you love, if these are dearer to you than Allah and His Messenger, and striving hard and fighting in His cause, then wait until Allah brings about His decision, torment. Allah does not guide those who are al-fasiqin, evildoers. Surah At-Tawbah 9, 23-24. Sheikh Ahmed ben Atiq has said, in the Book of Allah, the Quran, there is no ruling more apparent and significant than the ruling of Al-Wala wal-Bara, after the requirement of Tawhid, oneness of Allah, and the prohibition of its opposite. It was the first time for Rayhana Khan, accompanied her new family, at the Blue Lake. By then, she had already spent a few months in her daughter's house. The rift between them had closed with Christina's unconditional forgiveness and the time and space for healing. It didn't take much for Rayhana to decide to end her days with her long-lost daughter and granddaughters. She had no doubt that her daughter was a Christian. She remained true to her faith, explaining to her daughter that she was born a Muslim and would live and die as one. Understandably, she did not join them in their prayers and Bible readings. Each Sunday, she spent her time alone while her new family made their way to their church. Rayhana had become very religious woman after her third marriage. It was part of her to pray 5 times a day, recite the Quran, and fast all the 30 holy days of Ramadan. Tailing the Lewinsky van to the Blue Lake, Mustafa assessed the situation and decided that his mission was nearing completion. A few families and couples were in the vicinity, making the most of their weekend. Mustafa parked his car and eased out of it, taking care to keep his mother in his field of vision. She walked behind her granddaughters while Christina and her husband busied themselves unloading their picnic paraphernalia. Mustafa clasped the pistol in his pocket to reassure himself it was still there and readied himself. He visualized changing the peaceful scene into a landscape of horror and carnage. The mighty hand of Allah would use his hand and shoot the blasphemous girl in the head and avenge the blessed final prophet to mankind. Allah was going to guide the bullet which was going to take the life of the girl who blasphemed the master of all creation, the one who was sent as mercy to the worlds, the seal of all the messengers of God, and the beloved of Allah for whom He has created everything. Mustafa Abdul Gawad expected to be apprehended after his mission was successfully executed. He decided not to kill his brother-in-law, nor his nieces, or his mother, unless they tried to thwart him. His only target was his apostate and blasphemous sister. Then he would leave the scene in his car, abandon after driving it a fair distance and continue his journey on foot. He knew that witnesses would probably note the car registration and he would have to ditch it. Mentally rehearsing each step of his plan, he closed in on the van and his sister. He was close enough to touch her when he pulled out his pistol and had it at a point-blank range at her head. A flashback. Mustafa Abdul Gawad was able to deceive the American consulate in Lahore during his student visa application. The officer interviewing him harbored doubts about his story, and escalated his concerns to his superior, explaining that his fluency in English, his lack of Pakistani accent, and his facility with English conversation pointed to the fact that he neither grew up in Pakistan nor was he raised in a Pakistani home. He suspected a Western upbringing and it made no sense. His superior advised that it was against their policy to discriminate against a Pakistani student simply because of his foreign accent. His objection overruled, Mustafa got his student visa and flew to the United States of America. In his freshman year, someone else noticed suspicious discrepancy and reported him to the resident assistant. The complaint was ignored, because again, it looked like the complaint was racially motivated, the complainant being an Indian Hindu. From then on, it was plain sailing for Mustafa. He looked the role of the international student. He attended his classes while searching for his target. This is an excellent example of how political correctness and appeasement of Muslims are weakening the USA and jeopardizing lives. Political correctness dictates that in courts of law, government buildings, and public schools we should use the name of God in general but not the name of our Lord and God Jesus Christ so that we should not offend the Muslims and Jews. The initial phase of Mustafa's search depended on the internet. He did complex searches combing names, keywords, and phrases. The resultant list of Christina Lewinsky's was manageable. He knew without a doubt, the Christina Lewinsky he was looking for was once a Muslim waif from the slums of Mumbai. She would be conversant in Hindi and Urdu with a slight trace of an accent. All he needed to do was call. The list continued to shrink. Mustafa's search was unnoticed for a long time. Towards the last month of his search, an employee from the phone company noticed that all his calls were to women of the same name. The employee had a gut feeling something was not right. It could be that the customer was just harassing all women bearing the name Christina Lewinsky. Either way, his gut feel took a turn for the worse when he noted the customer's name, Mustafa Abdul Gawad. Realizing that he might have uncovered something sinister, he notified his superior, got the necessary clearance and informed the police. The initial police investigations revealed that the suspect was a Pakistani. Discreet inquiries threw more light on his character. He was known to be a very devout Muslim who kept mostly to himself and was essentially an introvert. The question as why a strong Muslim would continue making short call to Christina Lewinsky's remained unanswered. The police decided that it was time to question the suspect, with only circumstantial evidence pointing to a suspicious motive. They decided to watch him closely for developments. The police did not have an inkling of his plans until he arrived at the residence of his intended victim. They had been tailing him for some time now and as a matter of routine, they followed his car as he neared the little community in which his target lived. The officers in the unmarked car kept a discreet distance. They still knew next to nothing of his plans and that fact that he was already armed with a semi-automatic pistol. Mustafa reached the Christina Lewinsky's house and eased into a strategic position to observe it, his action not lost on his observers. As the family members exited the house into their van, the officers noted some Asians in the family and realized that there might be a link between this particular Christina Lewinsky and their suspect. Something was definitely underfoot, but the officers could only guess at his point. One of them slyly mentioned that Mustafa Abdul Gawad could be involved in an affair with the pretty lady of the house, in mock exasperation. As the van left the Lewinsky, Mustafa eased his vehicle in behind them. His observers dutifully tagged along, and when the convoy stopped at the Blue Lake, they parked a discreet distance away at a spot rewarding them with an unobstructed view of the suspect. Eager not to break their cover, the officers rushed out of their patrol unit the moment they saw Mustafa pull a gun out of his pocket. The officer closest to Mustafa rushed in to meet the threat, his training kicking in. He already had his weapon drawn when he saw Mustafa point his gun to the back of Christina's head. Had Mustafa shot immediately, they would not be able to stop the carnage that followed. Fortunately, true to his creed, Mustafa deemed that his victim should not die without knowing why and who her executioner was. He began to speak to Christina in Urdu, cursing her and letting her know that her fate had followed her all the way from India for her blasphemy of his gracious prophet Muhammad, the master of creation. Then, he began to speak directly to his demigod, "O Allah, I am drawing closer to you by slaying my accursed sister, who dared to speak against your beloved prophet Muhammad." A moment before he finished his satanic prayer, fully pronounced that abominable name, and squeezed the trigger, the officer closed the distance and fired a round into his temple, killing him immediately. If the officer delayed his shot a fraction of a second, until Mustafa finished the vicious name, Muhammad, Christina would have been another terror statistic. Rayhana Khan caught a glimpse of her son just before the officer let off a shot. She recognized him immediately. She had never expected to see him again. Her late husband had once told her that Irvin had left India for Pakistan to join the Islamic jihadists. The mother hid this disturbing information from her daughter and told her a quite different story. Rayhana thought that her son would not return to India after his association with the Pakistani Mujahideen. From the onset, Rayhana had never been agreeable to the path her son had opted to take. The trips to the mosque with his stepfather had already conditioned him to hate India and the Hindus. She tried to convince him that there were Indian Muslims living in Hindustan and not Pakistan, and hence they should love India and all Indians. No matter what, her son's hatred towards India and Hindus continued to fester until he saw fit to emigrate to the land of the Pakistani Muslim Mujahideen. Rayhana saw the gun in her son's hand and had also divined his intention. She wanted to shout out to him to stay his hand, and tell him that Christina was his sister. Her admonishment was drowned out in the roar of the gunshot. She crumbled to her knees and began to cry. She naturally assumed that he had succeeded in killing his own sister. When she finally brings herself to look up, she saw her daughter standing by her husband, trembling with fear. Her American husband, Michael, led her away from the body of the attacker. When she managed to get to her feet, Rayhana saw her son crumbled by the van with an ever-expanding pool of blood and cerebral matter wringing his head. Michael tried to explain to his mother-in-law what he thought had happened, that a Muslim terrorist had attempted to execute his wife, but was stymied by the American police. It took Rayhan a long time to overcome the shock of the incredible sight she just had witnessed. When she finally spoke, she explained who the terrorist was. Neither Michael nor Christina believed what they heard. The family reached the police station in complete silence, trying to insulate the two daughters from the horror of the incident. At the police station, Rayhana Khan confessed that the boy who was killed was her son, whom she had lost contact with. She wept copiously for the innocent memory of a boy she remembered. After recording her statement, she explained to her daughter and son-in-law the name of the boy and his history. Christina had never seen her brother until that fateful day. Rayhana also told them that she had conceived him after being raped in Jeddah and birthed him in prison. She explained how he was influenced by her third husband, and eventually found favor with hardline fundamentalist Muslims, culminating in him becoming a mujahid, a holy warrior in the way of Allah. The initial investigations by the FBI tried to determine the extent of Mustafa Abdul Gawad's network in the States, eventually uncovering evidence pointing out to him being a lone wolf. The police, too, tried to define the link between him and his mother, finding it implausible that mother and son had simply worked independently to locate Christina. For that reason, Rehana Khan was detained for some time. Mustafa Abdul Gawad alias Irfan Khan was registered as a Pakistani student. Rehana said that she knew her son as Irfan Khan only. The police surmised that the name Mustafa Abdul Gawad was an alias purely to facilitate his entry to the States. Through the combined reports of the Indian police and the American consulate in Mumbai, the FBI uncovered the rationale behind Irfan's illegal entry into Pakistan and why he assumed a new identity. No matter how the American police tried, they could establish no link between the mother and her son's mission. In due course, she was released and allowed to continue living with the Lewinskys. Through the police, Christina Lewinsky came to know of Irfan's mission and how he made his way from Pakistan. They also told her how he had managed to track her down. The only error in the recreation of the crime was the fact that her brother did not recognize her as his own sister. Some of the officers believed that her brother might have not attempted to kill her if he recognized her. In any case, the attack showed that the Lewinskys' safety had been compromised and similar attacks were probable in the future. Both her husband and the Justice Department recommended that she change her name and move to an undisclosed location, taking cues from the Witness Protection Program. Under advisement, she assumed the identity of Susan Johnson, deliberately picking commonplace names that would help shield her from discovery. What the Lewinskys and the American police did not realize was that the Muslim terrorists were not about to let this failure go unchallenged. Their code and reward systems ensured that anyone who spoke against their faith should never be allowed reprieve nor respite. With their increasing presence in more and more Western centers of population, it was only a matter of time. The Muslim diaspora multiplies rapidly in the West via polygamous families and from immigration of refugees influxes, legal and illegal. Ingratiating and burrowing into the local fabric, it was not inconceivable that the next attack on Susan Johnson and her family originate from Muslims already in the employ of the police, military, or intelligence agencies.